Now, we all know that English learners or multilingual learners represent about 9% of the population. Too many languages to list. They are both, contrary to common assumptions, multilingual learners include both US-born and foreign-born students. There is a substantial number of students living in two-parent homes. Many of them come from low SES families. And we know there is extensive research on second language development to document that when you grow up bilingual, whether you do it simultaneously or sequentially, there are plenty benefits, cognitive, social, emotional, and other areas. About 8% of those students have a disability. However, we don't have enough research on this population, unfortunately. And as I said a minute ago, the issue of disproportionality, it's an uneven picture. Some concerns, Melgarejo and Martinez Alvarez reported that in the last 10 years alone, this population, multilingual learners with disabilities, grew by 30%. So that's fast. Why? We don't know yet. And there is increasing attention to this framework called the Ever English Language Learner Framework. Umansky and her colleagues have been writing about it. The argument is that the problem with the multilingual learner population is that it changes all the time. As you reclassify students, then you end up with a different configuration of learners at different grade levels over time. And so your measures over time are deceiving because they're just giving you snapshots of very different groups. And they argue, what if we take all of the students that were at some point considered multilingual to get a better picture? Because otherwise we just end up with a population that is skewed towards the lower levels of a number of indicators. That's an interesting perspective. Now, many misunderstandings about this, unfortunately. Here are 4 of them, quickly, from the National Academy of Sciences report, which I recommend highly. It's a very good synthesis. If you haven't seen it, you can download it for free from the website. One common assumption you hear, not only in schools, but in pediatricians' clinics, is that if you have a child with a disability in a bilingual home, they will get confused and overwhelmed if you speak more than one language. So you should not do that. If you see kids code switching on the playground, in the classroom, anywhere else, that is only an indication of confusion. That means they don't master any language. They just don't know. Contrary to that, there is sociolinguistic and applied linguistics research showing that is not the case. That this is not related to the inability of the kids to handle the two languages. It's related to a number of linguistic and cultural practices in certain speaking communities that have very different meanings and have solid connection to identity processes. And code switching can be as complex as any other form of so-called standard languages. Another recommendation is that parents are told, don't use your home language. Stop. Just stay with English, because that's going to help your child acquire the second language. Again, it's a fallacy. Now, the exposure to those languages also will worsen language impairments, and it's going to overload the cognitive information they may handle. All of these are misunderstandings about language. There is no evidence showing that even if you have a moderate disability, you can still learn multiple languages. The brain is wired for that. And over the long term, it brings a number of incredible benefits to people's lives. There are some intriguing changes that are troubling for me. I already mentioned this growth of students in the last 10 years, 30%. When you look at the population of long-term English learners or multilingual learners, you find that about 1/3 of them have a disability. So that's a very difficult, to use the sociology of classification terminology, residual category. These are students that are kind of in limbo. They just drag along in the system, and they just can't make the criteria for reclassification, despite evidence that a number of them are doing well in certain indicators. I'll say a little more about that later. And we also learned recently that 33 states are identifying dual language learners for learning disabilities at a higher rate than the average for the whole country, as high as 70%. So there seems to be a convergence between you speak another language, you may end up in learning disabilities. That's something that we need to track. And then the question is, what are we assuming about learning that may be misconstruing the role of language? So you can see there are different subgroups here. And so the point is that heterogeneity matters. We talk about this problem of multilingual learners and disabilities. Do they belong? Is it because of a second language? Is it because of a disability? But we don't stop to think, who are we talking about? Are they refugees? Are they newcomers? Are they all of these different groups, long-term English learners and so forth? So heterogeneity matters. It's one of the key insights that we need to keep in mind. Context matters. If you are not in any of those 33 states, your chances are not the same. You might have a very different experience as a multilingual learner if you're not in any of those states that are referring kids for learning disabilities. Why is that? You might be learning disabled in this state. If you move to the next state that is not necessarily placing at that rate, you all of a sudden lose the label. What is that? Is it the schooling? Is it the food? Something is happening. Is it the policy framework? Is it the assumptions that we bring, the cultures of the districts, the historical legacies of how we see second language in the US that has privileged monolingualism? We have to think about that. And of course, with the heterogeneity piece comes the intersectionality.